For decades, the study of human history relied primarily on skeletal remains, stone tools, pottery fragments, and traces of habitation. However, over the past 2 decades, ancient DNA has opened an entirely new window into the past, allowing scientists to trace populations that once existed but left no clear material evidence. These groups, known as ghost lineages or ghost populations, represent genetic branches that have vanished, assimilated, or survived only as signals detected through statistical models. In such cases, DNA becomes the only tool capable of reconstructing their presence, revealing a genetic history far more complex than anything archaeology had previously imagined. The most reliable method for identifying interbreeding between modern humans and archaic hominins is the sequencing of DNA from Neanderthal and Denisovan fossils. Genomes dating back more than 100,000 years have enabled direct comparison with the DNA of present-day humans, strengthening our understanding of prehistoric interactions across Eurasia. However, for many other ancient populations, particularly those living in hot and humid environments such as the Near East or South Asia, the conditions for DNA preservation are poor, making it impossible to obtain complete genomes. This absence of material data has compelled geneticists to develop sophisticated statistical models capable of detecting unusual fragments of archaic DNA still persisting in modern humans. When pieced together, these genetic fingerprints have uncovered long-obscured layers of history, revealing entirely new human groups previously unknown to science. 1. Basal Eurasians, the foundational ghost lineage of West Eurasia and Europe. One of the most intriguing cases is that of the Basal Eurasians, an ancestral population that appears only in genetic models and has never been identified through archaeological remains. This group split from all non-African human lineages between 45,000 and 60,000 years ago, earlier than the interbreeding events between Homo sapiens and Neanderthals in Western Asia. This explains their most distinctive feature. Basal Eurasians carry no Neanderthal DNA whatsoever. They were first detected when scientists analyzed the genomes of Neolithic Anatolian farmers. These ancient samples carried 40–50% basal Eurasian ancestry, and as the agricultural waves spread into Europe, their DNA mixed with that of local hunter-gatherers, shaping the characteristic genetic profile of later European populations. Notably, the dilution of Neanderthal DNA in Southern Europeans compared to Northern Europeans can be explained largely by the spread of Basal Eurasians. As this group mixed with other populations in Western Asia and Europe, they reduced the proportion of Neanderthal DNA in later groups. As a result, modern Southern Europeans generally possess lower levels of Neanderthal ancestry than Northern Europeans, even though Southern Europe was inhabited by Neanderthals for a longer period and at higher densities. This provides clear evidence that genetic history cannot be inferred simply from geographic history or archaeological distribution. Despite their far-reaching influence, the Basal Eurasians remain an almost complete enigma. No skeleton has ever been identified as belonging to them, and no specific archaeological culture is associated with this lineage. Analyses from the Near East and the Levant indicate that some groups around 10,000 years ago carried roughly 35% of this ancestry. Yet it appears across many populations through a long, multi-millennial process of admixture rather than a single event. Basal Eurasians thus stand as the quintessential example of a ghost lineage, present in genetic data but absent from the archaeological record. Magdalenian and Elmiron, a culture that endured while the population disappeared. The case of the Magdalenian culture representing the post-Ice Age period in Western Europe also reveals the mismatch between archaeology and genetics. In 2014, the genome of the Elmiron woman from Cantabria, Spain, dated to around 19,000 years ago, produced an unexpected result. Despite belonging to a culture rich in archaeological remains, her DNA left little genetic impact on later European populations. She carried mtDNA haplogroup U5b, which is common among European hunter-gatherers, but her overall genome placed her in an intermediate position between Gravettian hunter-gatherers and post-Ice Age Western European hunter-gatherers. Yet most of her genetic signal disappeared as Europe underwent dramatic changes following the Ice Age, when melting glaciers allowed populations from southern refugia to expand back into northern regions. Only a few Mesolithic samples from Iberia preserve faint traces of this lineage, another example of a ghost population that once existed and was later replaced through a complex interplay of migration and genetic drift. 3. Gravettian and early European populations with East Asian-related ancestry. Returning to an earlier period, data from Gravettian individuals, Europe's inhabitants around 35,000 years ago, further reveal an astonishing degree of diversity. Several genomes from Kostenki, Russia, and Goyet, Belgium, contain genetic signatures no longer found in later Europeans. Notably, the individual Goyet Q116-1 carried approximately 68% DNA related to East Asian ancestors, a component that disappeared entirely from Europe after the Ice Age. This indicates that an early human lineage with distant ties to Asia once existed in Europe, but contributed little to the ancestry of modern Europeans. Genetic signals such as haplogroup U2, common among Gravettian individuals, also gradually vanished or survive only at very low frequencies today. Once again, ancient DNA reveals human populations that were interrupted or went extinct, even when archaeology alone suggests cultural continuity through tools, rituals, or subsistence practices. Ancient North Eurasians, ANE, a ghost lineage with global influence. If the Basal Eurasians and the Magdalenian represent ghost lineages in the Near East and Western Europe, then the ancient North Eurasians, ANE, are a striking example of a ghost population that once spanned an enormous territory and profoundly influenced many modern human groups. When the genome of the Malta boy from Siberia 24,000 years ago was decoded, an unexpected ancestral lineage emerged. ANE contributed 30–40% of the ancestry of Native Americans and 30–50% of the ancestry of the Yamnaya the steppe pastoralists who initiated the Indo-European expansion. This was a population that once occupied the northern fringes of the Eurasian continent, highly adapted to frigid climates. Although they no longer exist as a distinct group, their indirect descendants stretch from North America to Europe, demonstrating the complex migration patterns that archaeology alone cannot fully explain. Recent discoveries show that populations in Kazakhstan, the Baikal region, and the pre-Yamnaya steppe also carry genetic components once thought to be exclusive to North Asia or Siberia, such as Y haplogroup Q and the mtDNA lineages C4 and G2A. This indicates that prehistoric groups were already moving back and forth across the Eurasian steppe tens of thousands of years before horse-based pastoralist societies emerged. These populations contributed to the genetic diversity of the Yamnaya, which later spread into Europe during the Bronze Age. This is an example of ghost lineages not confined to the Paleolithic, but embedded within the complex migration networks of the Metal Ages. 5. Neanderthal, Denisovan, the classic ghost lineages. The discussion of ghost lineages wouldn't be completed without mentioning the Neanderthals and Denisovans, two archaic human groups that left the most distinct genetic signatures in modern humans. Europeans carry approximately 1.8–2.6% Neanderthal DNA, but this ancestry is not evenly distributed. Northern Europeans have higher proportions than Southern Europeans, a pattern that once puzzled researchers because the historical range of Neanderthals was centered largely in the south. Only with the discovery of the Basal Eurasians did the explanation become clear. Southern Europeans possess more Basal Eurasian ancestry, a lineage completely lacking Neanderthal DNA, which resulted in a stronger dilution of Neanderthal contributions. Meanwhile, the Denisovans, a group of archaic humans known only from a few bone and tooth fragments found in Denisova Cave, also left traces in Europeans. Although present at only low levels, around 0.1–0.5%, the occurrence of Denisovan DNA in Europe indicates that interactions between archaic and modern humans were far more complex than what archaeology alone has documented. Certain genetic variants, such as the ZNF558 gene, may even have contributed to cold adaptation in ancient Europeans, although its physiological role is still under investigation. From all these cases, a new picture of human history is gradually emerging. Not a simple evolutionary tree, but a complex network of populations that appeared, expanded, disappeared, remixed, and sometimes left behind only a few % of their DNA in later generations. Ghost lineages demonstrate that many groups once present on Earth left no bones, tools, or artifacts at all. They survive only as fragments of DNA hidden within our genomes, reconstructed through probabilistic models and sophisticated statistical comparisons. This leads to an important lesson. Genetic history does not perfectly align with archaeological or cultural history. A culture may persist continuously, even as its inhabitants change. Conversely, certain human lineages may disappear biologically, yet leave their marks in the genetic structure of millions of people today. DNA does not recount the story of a single people, but rather of the many lineages, men and women, tribes, and small migrating groups that moved across continents tens of thousands of years ago. Today, as techniques for decoding ancient DNA continue to advance, we may have only begun to scratch the surface of the genetic mysteries still hidden in the past. The ghost lineages of the Near East, Siberia, Western Europe, and Central Asia are likely only the first examples among dozens or perhaps hundreds of populations that once existed. Each new discovery not only clarifies the origins of modern humans, but also reminds us that human history is anything but simple. A story shaped by encounters, separations, disappearances, and survivals, sometimes preserved only as scattered fragments of DNA across our chromosomes.